Also Facebook live streaming, so anybody watching on Facebook, good morning and welcome to 1 Million Cups. So today's 1 Million Cups is a special panel discussion. We're doing this as a part of Startup Beloit Week, and there are several more events that you can go to this week. For a full schedule, go to startupwi.org. We have Aaron Clausen and Morgan Olson here from Iron Tech. They have put together the entire week of events for Startup Beloit Week. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for the opportunity to cross the border and have us take part in that as well. So let's give them a hand. They're going to be available after our panel discussion, so if anybody has any questions about Iron Tech, Startup Beloit Week, feel free to hunt them down and ask away. All right, so our regular things, coffee sponsors. Nathan Bolin of Stillman Bank is our coffee sponsor today. He's been connected with 1 Million Cups Rockford since the beginning, so thank you, Nathan. Who brought the coffee? Mr. Bob Ewald from Fresh Horizons Coffee. If you are involved in a nonprofit looking to build sustainable revenue, get connected up with Bob. Also today we have a special treat. So we brought in coffee-inspired craft beer for the event from 3 Wisconsin craft breweries, Hinterland from Green Bay, Pearl Street Brewery from La Crosse, and Lakefront Brewery from Milwaukee. And Reed, who's on our panel, also brought some local Rockford craft brew from Prairie Street Brew House. So thank you for that. If you haven't got a beverage, I would encourage you to settle in, have some coffee or some booze, and let's enjoy the morning. Next week, after 1 Million Cups, we're having our Google Partners Connect event from 10:45 a.m. to noon. And we're going to focus on B2B companies. So there's no cost to attend. As Google partners, we have these events through Google often. So this one will be a good one if you're looking to find out more information on how to utilize Google for your B2B companies. Okay, so the format for today is a little bit unique for a 1 Million Cups. We're doing a panel discussion. So I'm going to introduce the panel. We have some prepared questions, some statistics. We'll open it up to some Q&A. I'll quiz you guys in the audience a little bit too. And then we'll keep going and have a good time. Afterwards, you guys can stay and network and have some more fun. All right, beer. This is coffee.
Boo.
Booze. All right, so we're here today as part of Startup Beloit Week to talk about the craft brewing industry. Many familiar with the brewing industry have watched it take shape over the past several years. And so it's become more than just brewing beer as a hobby out of your bathtub. Now we can say it's a competitive and crowded market. So I brought together some industry experts from our region to discuss the various challenges as well as the successes so that they can explore how they've taken advantage of the opportunities to become successful. So let's meet our experts. We have Reed Sjostrom. I've been practicing. He's the Vice President and Brewery Director of Prairie Street Brewing Company, a locally owned brewery and brewpub. It also has an events facility, and so he's here to discuss the winding path of starting and running a brewery and a brewpub. Next, we have Aaron Sleger. He's an advanced Cicerone and co-founder and director of the Screw City Beer Festival. Since 2011, Aaron has been the beer director at Artale, Rockford's premier specialty wine, beer, and spirits shop. Aaron's cultivated 10 years of experience in the craft beer industry. So welcome. Jeff Glazer is an attorney at Ogden Glazer Schaefer. He's also a clinical assistant professor at UW Law Entrepreneurial Clinic. He's the founder of Madison Beer Week and the owner and editor-in-chief of the Madison Beer Review. He uniquely understands the challenges and opportunities facing startups that create craft products in a crowded market. And last but not least, we have Jason Todd. He's the managing director here at Thinker, a Rockford-based business development company. Jason has started and exited businesses and regularly consults with business owners on topics of business strategy, technology, and marketing. Thank you guys for being here. All right, so I want to open it up to the panel and talk about how each of you got your start in the industry. So let's start with Aaron. Can you familiarize the audience with what an advanced Cicerone is?
Sure. Yeah, so think about the Cicerone certification program as kind of the beer industry's equivalent of a wine sommelier. So it's a certification program that was developed about 10 years ago now in Chicago by a man called Ray Daniels as a way to elevate service in this ever-growing beer industry. I mean, we've got like 6,300 breweries now here in the country. And foreseeing that kind of 10 years ago, he realized there needs to be a heightened level of service to take care of that. So there are 4 levels. I would be 3 of 4. So it's just proven expertise in tasting and analysis and history and styles and food pairings and stuff like that.
So how does being an advanced Cicerone impact your business?
So we at Artale Co, if anyone here is familiar, we're a specialty wine and beer shop here in town. What the Cicerone program has definitely lent for me is a way to help educate consumers, which I think is very important in order to navigate this wide kind of jungle that is the craft beer industry now, or the beer industry in general. So we value customer service, and in doing that, it's about educating the consumer, making them feel comfortable, making them make informed decisions for their purchases and everything like that.
Do you find that having that more advanced skill set than a typical beer retailer increases the amount of customers that frequent Artale Co?
You know, I don't know. That's kind of interesting. Maybe. I don't know if it's necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people that aren't certified Cicerones at all that are definitely very knowledgeable and whatnot. So I think it's just more of a personal thing. We try and execute excellent customer service, and I'm sure people come in because of that, but that's not what we rely on.
Thank you. Reed, what makes Prairie Street Brewing Company so unique?
Oh man, well, a lot of things really. Well, one of the first thing I think of is kind of the time that we came into the Rockford market, downtown being a little bit slower than it is now. So just being able to provide a interesting service to downtown is one of the things that makes us unique. But also the ability to have weddings and events and then create our own products is, whether it's food or beer, all of these things kind of make the experience very unique at Prairie Street. We use a lot of local ingredients, whether it's for the beer. We've been doing some research with some hop growers down in Amboy. Excuse me. And then, yeah, just the local food as well, and pairing all that with the beer and the food, putting all that together.
Jeff, you have an interesting blend of entrepreneur experience with the craft market and a legal background. Can you unfold if this was intentional or did it all happen by chance?
Totally intentional. Totally intentional. No. So when I left, I used to work for a law firm here in Rockford, and when I left that law firm and moved to Madison, I was looking for a job and didn't have a whole lot going on, so I spent my time drinking beer, much to my wife's chagrin. And so while I was job hunting, I was creating my own job, and I started writing about beer. And this was back in the days when not a whole lot of people wrote about beer. So I took the product and the industry seriously. My interests are in the business side of beer, so I started writing about the business of beer. And really, it was because I was just looking to fill time. But then people started calling me and saying, hey, you're a lawyer and you know something about beer. Can we hire you? And I went, oh my God, I can make a living doing that. Neat. So then at some point there, it became intentional. But no, very definitely when I first got started, it was a love of the product that brought me into the industry. And then my own background and passion for the industry that's kept me in it.
Do you ever find any challenges that make you question whether you should stay in it or switch gears?
It's a challenging industry, for sure. It's not a cheap endeavor to get breweries started, or wineries, or distilleries for that matter. And so when young breweries are looking where they should allocate their capital, lawyers are not at the top of the list. So yeah, it can be challenging. But again, I mean, we love the industry, so we find a number of ways to support it. So, that's both through my law firm, but then we also provide free legal services through the university. So for those that can't afford legal services, they can come to the University of Wisconsin and use the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic to get legal services. So we've really figured out a way, I think, to support entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Are those legal services that are free through the university only open to Wisconsin residents?
That's an interesting question. Kind of, sort of, but not really. We have worked with a number of Illinois companies. Some of them are connected to the university. Some of them aren't. So it sort of depends. Sometimes we try to find more local services, but if anybody applies to our services, we try to at least help them in some meaningful way. So even if that's identifying services in their own location that would be available and helping them make that connection, we at least try to do that if we're not the ones able to provide services.
Thank you. Jason, you've got years of experience working with companies from various industries. Will you discuss the importance of brand and, watching the craft brewing industry balloon, what makes brands stand out over others?
Ooh, good question. So I would, I should have heard these questions before now.
I gave you plenty of time to prepare.
I should have paid attention before now. So I would unwind everything and say that people don't interact with constructs, and companies are really just constructs. So people interact with other people, and that's why it's so important that when we talk about brand, we talk about personality and things like that, because we're social beings. And so I think the importance of having a brand and having it be unique and all this other stuff is because every person is unique, and that's why we interact with people uniquely. So I think that as consumers, particularly when we're looking at craft brewing and then some of the research that's been done, I think that people have become more personal with their buying habits, and so this idea of there's this one or two people brewing some special thing, and they've put their heart and their soul into it. People want that experience. They don't want to just believe that it all came out of some big vat someplace, and it's just benefiting some shareholders someplace. So I think they just want that personal experience, and so I think that in the idea of craft brewing and the rise of craft brewing, it's really because we've shied away or gone away from big corporate structures and wanting to interact with that, and just kind of be more grassroots and interacting with individual people and believing like we're going to make we're benefiting the guy next door.
Has that shift in buyers' experience and their need to have that close connection, is that connected with any type of age demographics?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure how that exactly plays out in brewing, but yeah, what we see in younger folks is moving away from corporate entities. Kind of like, well, I don't want the man to benefit, which is kind of, yeah, that's cool, but you're driving a car and it's the man. But when they have a choice, they want to deal with something more personal, something more local, something that they believe makes a difference. And I think we all want to make a difference, and believe that our buying habits make some sort of difference. But particularly with the things that are very personal, like foods and drinks, we do want to. There is a tendency or a trend, the research indicates it, that younger folks are more likely to interact with something that's more local and something that's more grassroots, and has a real personality and a real face behind it. And I'm certain that has always been true. We just now can measure it in a different way. By way of an example, I grew up with Aunt Jemima syrup. Maybe you guys grew up with Aunt Jemima syrup too. Yep. I'm pretty convinced there's no Aunt Jemima anywhere. I think it was a bunch of white guys in a boardroom going, how do we make a syrup how do we take this sugary stuff and make it palatable for everybody? And it's like, oh, you know what? This is home cooking. We're going to have this Aunt Jemima syrup. So I think that people have always tended towards personality, and kind of like who crafted this thing, but I think it plays out specifically in drinks and foods now.
Next thing you're going to say is that Betty Crocker isn't a real person.
No, she grew up next to Aunt Jemima. It was a long time ago.
Aunt Jemima was her aunt?
Yep. Mrs. Butterworth was across the street.
Yeah.
So after hearing you speak about that, I started thinking through my experience with beer. And I'll disclose that, yes, I might have started drinking beer at an earlier age than legal. But thinking through what types of beers were in the home at that time, Miller, Coors, then PBR became popular. But then something shifted where it was like, oh my goodness, imported beer, like Heineken and Corona, like that was a new experience, and it was so much better. And if you drank those imports, it elevated your experience to a different level, right? And now, I'd like to be curious to find out what type of beers are in other people's homes. Like if I open my refrigerator, the closest thing to a domestic beer would be a can of Spotted Cow. So what's in your fridge? Who drinks beer? All right, so let's survey the audience a little bit. What kind of beer's in your fridge?
Lakefront, I drink fixed beer quite a bit, but also Crystal Lake Brewery has a few that I like, Maker and a few others. And I do always keep Miller Lite with it. It's a crowd pleaser. I mean, if you have people over and you're trying to give them volume of beer.
Okay.
Volume is important.
Volume is important. So Jenny has her staple Miller Lite just in case, but Lakefront's one of her favorites. What's the brewery in Crystal Lake?
It's called Crystal Lake Brewery. That's another one. They have two or three, Slong King and Maker. And then there's Odell. I love that one out in Colorado.
All right, Crystal Lake Brewery in Odell. Anyone else? Scott Dobbs, you drink beer. What's in your fridge?
Sam Adams, Guinness, $3, Cigar City.
Cigar City, Three Daughters, Sam Adams, and
Cigar City. It's from Tampa.
and Guinness.
The last two.
Jeff, what's in your fridge?
Mostly beer from clients, so it tends to be very local. We have clients kind of all over the place, so it's kind of interesting. I actually have a beer cellar in my basement, so I keep all my beer at cellar temperatures. Have about 25 cases of beer, something like that. So kind of have a little bit of everything. So in my refrigerator, not much, but it's all in my cellar, and a lot of it's from clients. So pretty much all over the state of Wisconsin. I don't know, a little bit of everything. I kind of like a little bit of everything. So never know what I want, so I keep it all around.
All right. Yeah, that was a silly question for me to ask you, having a beer cellar. Reed, let's put you on the spot. Do you have any skeletons in your closet? What's in your fridge, buddy?
There's a good variety of beer in my fridge. I tend to buy beer that I wouldn't normally think to drink for myself. I definitely have the light lagers and the IPAs and things like that I enjoy. But yeah, a lot of the stuff. I'm not a huge dark beer person, but I tend to try to drink that stuff to learn more about it because I don't know too much about it because it's not my go-to. Besides that, yeah, I mean, just whatever the kind of new craze is. I have a lot of brewed IPAs in my fridge right now. Those kind of seem to be the new IPA that's taking off right now. And then I always keep a lot of nice Belgian beer too. Those are the best.
I thought maybe you'd say Coors or all Prairie Street. Anyone else?
I have Pro Peak in my fridge right now, so we actually created our family vacations around beer cat map adventures. We have a map of the United States that has beer caps from each state, so we always have beers from different states.
Tracy Shirk has a beer cap map adventure experience at home. Can I come on your next family vacation?
So last weekend we went to Mount Rushmore. So
Okay.
Pro Peak is from South
Pro Peak? Crow Peak from South Dakota. So yeah, your experience, you're getting out there. Thank you guys for sharing. So a lot of people use California as a model because they have the most amount of craft breweries and they collect the most amount of data. So some trends from 2016 to 2017 show that more breweries are now having tasting rooms, but there's not a significant more amount of beer being produced. So the shift is where the beer is being purchased and consumed that are going to drive the statistics and our trends. Jeff, are you able to elaborate on this?
Yeah, a little bit. I think a lot of it is sort of being driven because the off-premise market, the wholesaler, the grocery store market is just hyper competitive. It's a really hard place to sell beer if you're not Anheuser-Busch or Miller Coors. So there's been a strong push towards local, as Jason was talking about with the brand and just sort of general trends in brands anyway. So breweries are taking full advantage of that, I think, and promoting the local economy and promoting their local communities and being more and better engaged with their communities. And that's, as a result, they're driving people into their own places, which, by the way, have significantly higher margin than selling beer through a distributor to a grocery store. So they're able to get higher margin. They might sacrifice some long-term volume, but they can maintain sort of the size and scale that their community can support, and they can create some fairly stable, it sort of evens out some of the ups and downs of the industry by having a tap room.
The California regional craft beer sales are down 3.4%. However, the state sales are up 4.6%. And non-craft brewing outside of California is down 12.7%. National beer production remains consistent since 2011. It did have a peak in 2013. So people, like Jeff is saying, are consuming craft beer closer to home, or they're going to that local brewery. I think Reed and Aaron, you guys have a good perspective coming from a retailer and coming from being a brewery. Can you guys talk to us about if you're seeing those similar trends or not, and why?
Sure, yeah. So the idea of people wanting to drink closer to home, drinking local, is definitely a real trend right now. For example, 5 years ago, some of the best breweries we sold in our store were West Coast breweries. Stone, Bear Republic, a lot of Lagunitas, for example, too, even though they're now in Chicago as well. But over the last 3 years, with the explosion of the brewing scene in Chicago alone, you're seeing consumer habits retract back to, at least in this area, to Chicago and to breweries that are within, an hour and a half, 2-hour driving distance from here. So the amount of shelf space that we used to have dedicated towards a lot of West Coast brands and even mountain brands, Colorado brands, have significantly decreased. And the amount of shelf space, indoor space we have for Illinois, Wisconsin, Midwest brewing has doubled. People are more willing they want to take a chance on that IPA that was canned 2 weeks ago, 90 miles down the road, as opposed to that IPA from California that is walking in the store at 2 months at best. Fresher, local, and the whole idea of drinking fresh has been instilled, for better or for worse, in the craft beer community. And I say for better or for worse because beer is always showcased at its freshest state for the most part, 98% of beer for sure. But it's come to this extreme, especially with IPAs that tend to be very fragile. Hops are the component of a beer that fall off fastest. They're the most fragile. They're the first characteristic to go, typically. So the idea of drinking as fresh as possible has become the highest priority for the craft beer drinker, and to the point where some people won't even entertain an IPA that's more than 3 weeks old, which has gotten really kind of ridiculous. And honestly, for a beer that can't stand up more than 3 weeks on the shelf, I think you got to rethink your technique and your brewing practice there, anyways. But yeah, people are checking dates. Brewers are becoming a lot more savvy about putting bottled on date or best by dates on their beer because they know that consumers are looking for that. And consumers are definitely becoming vastly more aware about how fresh their beer is and becoming a lot more critical because of that.
I guess I'll just add that just while he's saying that, I agree with everything he says there. The one thing I'll throw in is, well, two things. Distribution, it's interesting. If you look at the amount of distributors that are in the country right now, there's fewer and fewer because they're consolidating. The distribution network is being run by the large conglomerates of beer. So it's harder and harder to get shelf space. It's been an interesting road. We've really started to try to push distribution this last year, and we're definitely too late to the distribution party because there's so much good beer out there, and there's so many varieties and so many people trying to get into the industry right now. So it's just really tough to get a beer, let alone your entire brand of beers on the shelf. The other thing that I think really drives the local beer movement is kind of brought on by the breweries themselves. I think Jeff mentioned earlier about the retail price of beer and being able to make more money when you're in your own tap room. So there's all these new breweries opening up that are these tiny little systems. I mean, we have a 15-barrel system. When you look at something like Lagunitas or something like that, I don't know, what do you think they are? 300, 500-barrel systems or something? Yeah, I mean, huge, right? A lot of these breweries have 1- and 3-barrel systems where there's no margin to put that beer on the shelf somewhere. By the time it goes through packaging, by the time you get a label approved by the TTB, by the time you get all these things put in place, to get your beer on the shelf, you're losing money. So local beer is a necessity because if you're going to produce the beer and make money on it, the consumer has to come to you.
Thank you. I was going to ask questions about distribution. So thank you for bringing that up. When you're speaking, you're talking about these smaller, local, driving people to your tap room. So how do you get people into your building and into your doors without without having your name on a shelf somewhere in a grocery store or a liquor store? And would you take a risk in losing money to get some visibility out on a shelf somewhere to then have those customers come in to have a better experience direct?
I'd say absolutely. Like I mentioned, we just started getting into distribution, and the profit margins on the beer in those cans over there is nothing compared to what we have in our tap room. But it's all about marketing and becoming a beer that people are used to seeing, becoming a beer that people grab quickly because they're used to it. Yeah.
Are there any kind of, are there any like loopholes or laws or regulations? Like what controls distribution? Like, so why is it so tough for a smaller company to get out there and get distributed aside from the amount they're producing?
I mean, there's a lot of factors at play there. Starting with sort of the hardest to overcome, which really isn't a legal barrier at all. It's more of a business barrier, which is to say that the grocery store shelves are owned by the large manufacturers, by Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors, and in some, not quite literally owned, because unlike in food products, breweries can't pay retailers for the shelf space, but they can do things like withhold brands and other kinds of games that happen in terms of pricing and discounting. So the reality is that the distributors have huge incentives to sell and to stock large brands that are giving them large discounts, right? So if a distributor is trying to decide, if I'm going to put on this shelf, am I going to put something that consumers may or may not buy, or am I going to put Miller Lite, knowing that Miller's giving me a discount that says for every 5 that I sell, I actually get another 2 for free, right? They're going to put Miller Lite on there all day, which is why you see the giant displays of Miller Lite and you don't see giant displays of Prairie, right? So that's sort of the most basic and really has nothing to do with the law at all. There are other problems that are in the law that do make distribution a challenge. I'll highlight 2 of them. One, in the state of Wisconsin, breweries are allowed to self-distribute. They at least used to be able to here in Illinois, and they
Certain licenses allow you to self-distribute.
But it can be hard to self-distribute, which means being your own distributor rather than going out and having a distributor. And so if you're able to self-distribute, that lets you capture at least some of the distributor margin, so that when you're selling to retail, you at least get to capture an additional 30%, right? But from a legal perspective, there's laws in both books, both Illinois and Wisconsin, that prohibit you, that once you have a wholesaler in the market, they're an exclusive wholesaler in that market. So you can only have one wholesaler in that market. And if you're not happy with that wholesaler, it can be really hard to get out. So in the state of Illinois, they have perpetual wholesale contracts. In Wisconsin, they're not necessarily perpetual, but they're not statutorily perpetual, but the business behind transferring distribution rights is extraordinarily complicated and expensive, and none of that money goes to the brewers in any case. So there are some legal impediments to wholesaling, and the reality of it is, even if you get through those legal impediments of wholesaling, you're still confronted with a grocery store shelf that's basically owned by Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors. Thanks.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about what is craft beer. So by definition, I believe people might have some differing opinions on what makes craft beer craft beer. Gentlemen?
I don't know, you're the fancy guy with all the degrees.
So, I mean, if you're going to look at the technical legal definition of craft beer, the Brewers Association, which is the governing body of independent brewers here in the United States, they define craft beer as an independently owned brewing operation, essentially, that produces upwards of 6 million barrels a year. They cannot exceed 6 million barrels a year, which sounds massive, and that has changed over the years up from 2 million as Sam Adams was growing.
It's the Sam Adams rule.
It's Sam Adams rule, yeah. And I mean, when you're looking at some of these mega corporate breweries like AB InBev and stuff like that, they're skyrocketed way above that level. So 6 million barrels is kind of the threshold in terms of production value. And then at one point, another part of the definition was ingredients. Ingredients had to be traditional. It had to be made with like 100% malted grains. And that has also recently changed as well, where a lot of large corporate breweries like Miller and Coors and Anheuser, they use a lot of what are called adjunct malts or grains, so corn and rice. Those are made to lighten the body, lighten the flavor of these beers, and that was a type of ingredient that the Brewers Association kind of railed against for a while, and they have since lifted that, at least corn. I don't know about, probably rice too. So really it comes down to size, who owns you. I believe now it's what a craft brewery can be owned up to 25% by a non-craft brewing entity. So brewers like Founders in Michigan that we're probably all familiar with, and recently Avery Brewing out of Boulder, Colorado, they just took on ownership of 30% by a South American brewery that has now negated them from the definition of being a craft brewer. So the Brewers Association has kind of like scrubbed them from, certain lists, production lists and whatnot. So there's the legal definition of craft brewer, and then there's also the abstract version, the subjective version, what we think craft beer is, and that's where you get into the wild west of everyone's differing opinions, and I don't think anyone's right, I don't think anyone's wrong. It's just what it's so subjective, it's what it means to you.
So what would be an example of something we would think is a craft beer, but by definition, legally is not?
Sure. So one we see a lot is, and I think consumer education has really impacted this over the years, but Blue Moon. We'll take Blue Moon, for example. For a long time, Blue Moon was created by Coors Brewing. It has always been a Coors product. But they skirt that in the market in terms of their packaging and their branding and their advertising. At no point on that packaging would you ever see that it was Coors Brewing Company. It was always the Blue Moon Brewing Company. So that creates a lot of consumer confusion as well. So a lot of people think that they're drinking a craft beer, but really they're drinking something masked, or what the Brewers Association once defined as crafty. They were differentiating crafty versus craft. Shock Top would be another brand that was wholly created by Anheuser-Busch in response essentially to Blue Moon and at the time when they were purchasing Goose Island 312, cashing in on that. Midwest is a big wheat beer market. Chicago especially is a big wheat beer market. And Chicago historically has always been a Miller priority population, essentially. Anheuser-Busch has always had trouble breaking into the Chicago market over the years, and so Shock Top was one of their efforts to help break in, and also purchasing Goose Island in stages. So yeah, there is a lot of, and just to kind of further this point, Goose Island now, a brewery that we all are very familiar with, dating back to 1988. They were purchased wholly by Anheuser-Busch in 2011. And still a brand that is people associate with being craft beer, but by legal definition would not be considered such.
Thank you. All right, for the sake of time, I'd want to uncover or just talk about a little bit of the positive and negative experiences all of you guys have had in your respected, well, in the industry, in your specialties and niches. So How are your companies managing growth? And what are some of the common pitfalls you might have seen? And out of all of that, what are the unexpected opportunities that you guys have seen as well? So let's start with Reed.
Growth was much faster than we had all anticipated from the very first year that we opened. When we were thinking about the size of our brewery, we scaled it to something that we thought we would grow into in 5 or 10 years, and we've pretty much outgrown that after the first year, we bought more tanks. So it's been really great to just see that, not only the local community, but people from all over the country coming into our brewery and experiencing our local beer. So that's kind of one of the great things. As far as, I guess, interesting opportunities, nothing that I can think of right off the top of my head here, but or that we've dived into quite yet. But there's, when we were talking about the Brewers Association kind of definition of craft beer, there's so many interesting little pockets of new products that are becoming pretty popular. The hard seltzer, for one, is a really interesting thing. That is actually, half of them are produced with a clear malt, and those are actually defined as a craft beer. So we can produce those under our license, as opposed to wine and spirits and things like that where we can't. That's something that's kind of disappointing that we can't do. We would love to be able to make wine and spirits and really have a showcase of all of these products, but we're pretty stifled by the rules and regulations that are set up by the federal government.
You should move to Wisconsin. You can have a winery and a distillery.
Exactly. I think, I can't remember how many states. I think there's something like 40 states that you can hold multiple, so the craft brewer's license, or there's multiple variations of that, or wine or distilled spirits. I think there's 40-something states that you can. Illinois is one of them that you can't. So, yeah, that's fun.
We're only 10 miles north.
I was going to say Prairie Street, Beloit.
Yeah, right.
Have you seen, what are some of the positives and negatives that you've seen coming out of being a craft beer expert at a retailer?
Sure, yeah. So Artale, we started in 2008, which was, by many accounts, a terrible time to open a retail shop in the economy. So we just turned 10 this year, and we've seen steady growth over the years, but we are also a very niche company. We cater to a very niche consumer. So our backs can always kind of be up against the wall in terms of competing with grocery stores and other retail spots here in town. But I think that one thing we excel at is that we fill a void for a particular level and quality of wine and beer that can't be found necessarily in a lot of other places in town. Not only that, but you walk into a grocery store and there really is no one around that can answer a question for you. Most of the people walking around a liquor department in a grocery store are sales reps from wholesalers. And they get approached all the time, and they're going to lead you to whatever brands they sell. But the advantage with us is you can walk into Artale, and we can kind of point you in the direction of whatever it is you're exactly looking for. And if you don't know, we can help you out. So I think that's one thing that's really has promoted our success over the years is customer service and being able to fill that void for kind of quality products. But being able to grow is always a challenge for being as small of a company as we are. I mean, there's only 3 of us there, and it's a small family-run company. So in order to expand, you always have to think about, where you're going to get the capital. Are you going to borrow? Are you going to go more into debt? And physical space. Do we have the physical space to expand? And so The Rockford market has been a great platform for our business, and we do have plans to expand, and hopefully that comes in the coming years, but we'll see.
Thank you. Jeff, what's a really great success story of one of your clients?
Really great success story. We've had a lot. Excuse me. We've had a lot of great success stories. I think the ones that have been most successful have been those that have identified most with their community, and as Jason was talking about, really understood what their brand was, and understood how and why consumers, that their customers connect to them, and really do a good job of leveraging that. So I think the most successful breweries are ones that understand who their customers are and why the customers want to be there and being associated with their product. And everybody has a different reason for that, and everybody gets into it for different reasons. So, it can be frustrating going to a bunch of brew pubs that sort of all look the same, because I guarantee you the people that started those are not all the same people. So I love walking into spaces that you can identify and that they're just uniquely their own. And I think those are the places that are most successful, that understand who their customers are and why those customers are there.
Thank you. All right, time for Q&A, because we got to start wrapping this sucker up. Anyone have any good questions? All right.
If craft brewing is a disruption to the beer industry in general, what is the next disruption that you might predict, either to the beer industry in general or specifically to craft brewing?
Okay, so what's the next anticipated disruption to any market related to beer?
So I was actually hoping to answer your last question, because this is one I think the biggest weakness is about the craft beer industry. It is incredibly white and overwhelmingly male. And I think that's a big weakness to the industry. There's only so many of us out there, right? And eventually we're all drinking beer. And so if craft beer is going to grow, it's going to be in people who aren't white and aren't male. And I think that's also where the greatest opportunity for innovation is finding products and finding brands that identify with the whole diversity of people that are in the United States or in local communities, and really tapping into that. So I think we're going to see an explosion of things. I mean, the hard seltzer is just one place where I think that has really brought a lot of women drinkers into what is essentially a malt product. And the fact that breweries can make that as an opportunity to diversify the kinds of people that are walking through their doors. We had a brewery up in Madison that for a period of time was making cheladas and selling that out of their brewery. I think we're just going to start to see more and more innovation to try to bring more and more diverse groups into craft beer.
I think also, if I can just expand on that, I think what we'll see is that the market's going to become saturated. I would argue that we're close to saturation anyhow, because there's no, as studies indicate, there's not a significant amount more beer being produced, right? So if you don't currently drink beer right now, you're not going to magically wake up one day and you go, oh, you know what, today it's the day, right? And so it's going to follow a quantity trend of the quantity of people and the percentage of those people who drink beer. How many barrels can you produce to fill that need, right? And then you'll hit that point. Well, then you back that into how many companies produce to fill that need. And once you start saturating the market, now all of a sudden you only have a handful of ways of moving your own sales, right? So you could come off with some fancy new thing. How many ways can you spin it, really? And then, or you can reduce your price, but then you get into distribution issues and quantity issues, and can you even make money at it? So I think what you'll see, as in any market, as soon as a lot of people can produce things, you hit that point of saturation, and then you get consolidation once more, and then you get people going out of business. And then it'll settle down into, well, this is the tried and true thing in my area. And it could be like, Prairie Street Brew House or something like that. Well, it's the tried and true thing. Cool. But you know what? There's going to be another brewery, and there'll be another brewery after that, another brewery after that, and it'll peak and steady off. And I don't know what significantly new thing will come out, but there's not that there's not that much more to be produced at this point.
Well, isn't marijuana going into beer totally?
Well, that's a disruption too. Marijuana and beer, and will people move from alcohol to something else, or do you mix the two together, which is altogether an entirely new and exciting thing if you've ever tried that. I think what you'll find is there's going to be a different way of achieving the same social result.
Any other questions? Yes.
So those of us that don't drink alcohol, but we like to go out and socialize, and we still like the flavor of beer, so I'll have some non-alcoholic beers once in a while. But I don't find a lot of craft beer that are non-alcoholic. Could that be a possible disruption or something to brew locally that would be set yourself apart? Because I go down there.
Just functionally removing alcohol from beer is really expensive because it's specialized equipment, but I'll let these guys talk to that.
Yeah, I guess, not to give a bad answer to this, but the demand for the NA beverages is just not there to produce it. You'd have to, you have to remove the alcohol, which is very time consuming and costly, and when you're looking at a market of 100 people, maybe you have 5 people out of that group, and that might even be stretching it, that are going to want a NA product. So it's just not worth it to us at this time.
I do think breweries, at least in Wisconsin, almost every brewery, or a lot of craft breweries, maybe not every, but a lot of craft breweries are doing like root beer products and soda products. That's not; those aren't beer products. So I don't know that that's a good answer to that. But they are trying to come up with products that aren't explicitly alcohol. Like I said, making a non-alcohol beer is expensive and requires specialized equipment. So not usually it's kind of beyond the capabilities of most craft breweries to produce something like that. But root beer and soda, a lot of breweries are doing really cool, interesting things in root beer and soda.
But I think there is still a part of the industry that sees that as a necessity. And jumping in right now, I completely forgot the name of the brewery, but there's a brewery that just signed on with a wholesaler for this market that specializes in non-alcoholic beer. So they're producing, when you think of non-alcoholic beer, you think of all the adjunct lagers out there made by the big guys. This is a brewery that has started up specifically with the mission to create more flavorful beer styles, pale ales, golden ales, amber ales, brown ales, with the alcohol removed. So if someone out there has noticed that that's a potential void in the market that needs some demand, although in what I do, I don't see too much request for that. I think if anything, it's more along the lines of gluten-free. You're seeing a lot more people curious about gluten-free or gluten-reduced or gluten-removed beers, as opposed to non-alcoholic. But I think we can't ignore the non-alcoholic thing. I think that is something that's part of the industry that can be addressed, and I think there's a small part of that market that would support that.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Next week, did you have a question? Did I miss you? All right. If anybody has questions after this, these guys will be here for a little bit networking, so feel free to approach them, ask away. Next week's 1 Million Cups presenter, since we're staying true to an alcohol theme this month for a chance reason, Addie Ford will be here to talk about Grandview Distillery. I saw her here earlier. She must have snuck away.
Yep.
So come next Wednesday, 9 a.m., and learn about whiskey. Also next week, I talked about the Google Partners event. This week's What Works podcast is with Carolyn Ziv, who runs a video production company in Chicago. Carolyn spent years as a TV producer with Dateline NBC and the Oprah Winfrey Show, and part of what we talk about was just having to get used to the fact that people are unlikely to call you back when you are in business for yourself. So tune in to the What Works podcast on Google Play
And iTunes.
and iTunes. All right,
Every
we also
Tuesday.
right.
Who's the Google user here?
We have mugs to give to our panelists. So thank you guys again for coming. Thank you, Startup Beloit Week, for having this event here with us. And thank you all for coming out. So grab some more coffee, stay in network. We've got some coffee-flavored brew, too. Thank you all.